the other hand, he has absolutely nothing. On the other hand, things could never get worse for him. They could only get better. They gave each other a pledge. Unheard of. Absurd. They gave each other a pledge. Unthinkable.
Shabbat Shalom, Bruchim Abiyim. I'm Rabbi Paul, your virtual rabbi. You have found Beit Virtuali, and let's stir up a little Torah together. Having just rewatched Fiddler on the Roof in the week following the death of Israeli actor Chaim Topol, Zechron Levacha,
Tradition!
I can authoritatively say that the experience of watching this as a Jewish adult living in the far east of Germany is far different than that of a child knowing essentially nothing of Jewish history growing up and living in Montana. No pejoratives there at all. I'm talking about evolving consciousness. Consciousness can evolve in Montana as well. But had you asked me even 20 years ago, around the time that I was contemplating going to rabbinical school for the first time, I probably would have parroted something that I'd heard from others, such as,
Fiddler on the Roof is a highly romanticized view of the late 19th, early 20th century shtetl life.
well, fair enough. The actual fiddler in the 1971 Norman Jewison movie version is clearly there metaphorically, representing not veritas, but both the dialogue with
Tradition!
and with persevering when all hope is lost. The final act in the movie is a highly romanticized take on the Tsar's policies in the Pale of the Settlement, and the movie doesn't deal with such thorny issues as conscription policies, legal career limitations, and the full extent of such things as the May laws. On the other hand, as my wife and I drank to Topol's memory and sang along with favorite melodies, I also wept embarrassingly intensely throughout the second act, something that hadn't happened with viewings earlier in life. Starting with the officially planned and executed trashing of the wedding ceremony of Tzeitel, Golden Teve's eldest, at the end of the first act, the second act shines a spotlight on an archetypal image for Eastern European Jews at that time, life being made steadily more unbearable for no other reason than Jewishness, followed by the forced evacuation of generational homes with 3 days' notice. Yes, it is seen through a lens that does not highlight the actual violence and death of the pogroms. Simultaneously, it is possible that without Fiddler on the Roof, there would be very little popular knowledge of the Pale, the shtetl, and pogroms. While probably technically accurate, my parroted assertions 20 years ago were at best ignorantly elitist and at worst wanton blindness. To learn anything, to understand anything of this period, you must stare, and then keep staring, and when you most wish to turn away, keep staring. To stare, however, you have to look, and if looking requires jovial absurdity like the To Life L'chaim drinking party, so be it.
To life, l'chaim.
That's a cool version, but that's not the version I meant.
Drink l'chaim to life! We'll raise a glass and sip a drop of schnapps in honor of the great good luck and favored you. We know that when good fortune favors two, such men it stands to reason we deserve it too.
Let's be honest, on occasion a rabbi needs mad skills. Anyway, here in Central Europe, there is still today a cultural aesthetic talked about frequently in the Jewish community regarding the proverbial suitcase under the bed. Much like the ending of Fiddler on the Roof, where actions that would paralyze and destroy most of us are taken with a shoulder shrug as our ancestors moved into another place that may or may not represent safety, there is an underlying concept of this which we have can end any day. Watching Fiddler on the Roof made me wonder if this, interestingly, wasn't a potential interpretation of one of the more baffling commands in Torah. So on the surface, the mitzvah, the commandment of which I speak, seems pretty innocuous. We know Shabbos is important in the Torah, and that when something's important, we're going to hear about it multiple times. Let's call it Torah Communication Strategy 101, and that's not far out of line with basic corporate presentation strategy. Tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them, and then tell them what you told them. So perhaps there is nothing too shocking at the beginning of Parashat Vayakhel when we read, on 6 days work may be done, but on the seventh day you shall have a Shabbat of complete rest. Holy to the Eternal, whosoever does any work on it shall be put to death. A little extreme, I know, and worth covering in some detail at some other time, but the next verse is the critical one for this discussion. You shall kindle no fire throughout your settlements on the Sabbath day. Again, other than the fact that we cannot really easily relate to extreme religious punishments for ritual obligations, this seems standard Torah fare. Shabbat's important, don't do work, fire's a part of the work. Except it's really not cut and dry. For quite a few reasons. One of the common streams of interpretation running through the Mikvaot Gedolot, the great commentators of the Torah, is in line with Ibn Ezra's quite practical explanation, since scripture earlier, in Exodus 12:16, mentioned with regard to the first and seventh day of the Passover, quote, "No manner of work shall be done in them save that what every person must eat," namely, that it is permitted to prepare food on these days. It now states with regard to the Sabbath, "You shall kindle no fire, to break bread, to cook meat, for fire is required in preparing all food." Okay, fine. Preparing fire from scratch without matches, it's work. The two primary ways of making fire in the Bronze Age from scratch would have been wood friction, or sparks from various types of stones and or metal, such as flint and pyrite. I have personally tried and failed with the first, but I've done the second on a few occasions with not that much trouble. Sure, it's work, but if you do this every day of your life, it will be exponentially easier than the couple minutes I needed at Boy Scout camp. So perhaps, in an effort to make sure we don't do work, this prohibition is about the entire process of fire making. That you need to prepare an area, gather your various materials, and have everything from dry grass to catch the initial spark to smaller chips of wood to feed in to eventually the steadily more hefty pieces of fire-sustaining wood. Yeah, I agree, the match is much easier, but every time I have heard this verse discussed at shul or rabbinical school, it has come with the rolled eyes of "Poor child, you are so privileged," followed by the miming of rubbing sticks together. Yeah, I get it. Admit it, that it is harder than even the most accurate movies make it seem, and if our nomadic ancestors only had had that for making fire, I would buy that explanation. But making fire, pure and simple, meant survival, which means in business speak that making fire was a core competency. The chef, for example, better have an idea how to put ingredients together to make an edible meal. That's part of their core competency. To someone that has never cooked, that might appear to be magic or contain a level of effort to which we are not accustomed. That is our perspective, not an objective measure of skill and competence after appropriate training and repetition. Fire, for our ancestors, meant survival, and had meant survival for far longer than we've had matches. And they would not only have been good at it, they would have been fast at it. It would have been a self-evident part of everyday life. Far less dramatic than... Taking it even one step further, it's clear from the various opinions of our sages and the later evolution of Jewish groups that even after thousands of years, not everyone was on the same interpretive page regarding fire and Shabbat. For the Karaites, for example, a Jewish group that crystallized in the 8th and 9th centuries of the Common Era, all texts other than the written Tanakh were rejected as authoritative. This meant that the rabbinical decisions and discussions of the Talmud would have had no authority, and the mountain on which the Karaites planted their flag was fire on Shabbat. The sages of the Talmud detailed a system of how fire kindled before sundown on Shabbat could still be used, hence a lot of traditional Shomer Shabbos behaviors up until today. Whereas the Karaites took the no kindling to mean no fire on Shabbat. Period. In more recent times, this has led to the famous debates regarding turning on and off lights. Is there a potential for a spark as circuit is closed? To Shabbos elevators and the use of timers. This cut and dry verse has never been cut and dry. Now, rolling up our sleeves a little bit, if we take a step back into anthropology, this becomes even more dubious, even though folks with a more fundamental reading of Jewish sacred texts get annoyed with this, and when I do this, the high probability remains that much in the Jewish narrative and ritual tradition can be traced back to either tribal differentiation and recognition or a narrative structure to ensure survival. Since Jews still exist, I'm going to go ahead and make the case that this is the case and that something there is worth looking at because it worked. A talit, for example, the prayer shawl with tassels or tzitzit on each of the four corners, can be hypothesized to demonstrate this. In a tribal reality with a true danger for wandering outside the tribe, incomprehensible for us today, it helps to know who belongs and who doesn't. This knowledge was literally life and death. Even better, it would be nice to know now, as they're still coming up the trail to our tents and are distant enough to drive them off with stones if need be. From a distance, however, I can see that there are tzitzit on the corners of their garment. Be welcome in our tents. If the tassels are not there, well, in our tribe, we are commanded to put them there by our deity, and so the folks coming up the mountain are not our tribe. They are dangerous. Get the sling and the warning stone, Mordechai. And before being accused of being too silly, it would do us all a little good to read about the danger outside of tribal safety in the Bronze Age in order to more easily calibrate our judgments of people that have not shared our societal and legal protections, even when those protections are flawed, as are all human institutions. The ritual elements of a tribe that survives, if the tribe happens to survive across time, are those that have provided the ability to survive. Sometimes these are direct, such as recognition of fellow members of the tribe, whereas others instead contain a part of our teaching narrative. If you want to see a combination of how this works, and so you know I'm not just making this up, that this was a concern in our narrative, thumb through the Tanakh and read the story of Shibboleth. I'll give you a link down below. But that's why this prohibition regarding fire is so darned peculiar. Fire is the very symbol of survival, and it has been since we first started harnessing it. Its existence in either the cave or the savannah kept away predators, allowed greater nutrition to be extracted from food, and allowed us to settle in places otherwise too inhospitable. How can taking away an element of pure and direct survival for 1/7 of the time possibly be of a survival benefit? Moreover, how can this prohibition be seen as anything other than arbitrary today? We're going to have to look at fire on a few levels to make this work. Fire is a real thing with practical meaning while simultaneously acting as both an external and internal symbol. Ibn Ezra's commentary addresses, apparently unsatisfactorily considering the amount of historical debate and confusion, the practical reasoning and hints at the tribal utility. The more I contemplate it, the more I'm just loving Ibn Ezra. Ibn Ezra seems to recognize the deeply Jewish truth that we are going to constantly debate and look for loopholes. It's what we do. By closing out this loophole, Shabbos becomes not only about what Shabbos itself is, but as well the preparation for it. This is critical and so hard outside of Orthodox life in the current year. We don't give ourselves time to prepare for Shabbos. Generally, there are exceptions. Bless you all. If you want to eat yummy food over the 25 hours of this central expression of Jewishness, you need to prepare not just an hour or so, but in truth days as far as logistics, shopping, and meal planning, and organization, followed by the day of activity leading up to the candle lighting. Fire, but 18 minutes before sundown, so we're good. If all this activity is forced before Shabbos begins, the preparation itself becomes a type of ritual activity. Cap this off with a simple truth. Do we value things more that we just do, or things that we put effort into preparation before we do them? This is perhaps a pretty surprising wisdom behind what perhaps seemed a few minutes ago to be arbitrary. Now, we return to Tevye's world and look at fire as an external symbol. As already mentioned, at its most primeval level, fire equals survival. This means that the sacred inspiration of the Jewish people included removing the very symbol of survival, this very symbol of survival, for 14.28% of the time. How does the removal of a practical tool of survival increase the likelihood of survival? The potential clue can be found in the holiday of Sukkot, the Feast of Booths. Permanent housing is also a pretty darn clear survival advantage. Yet, we move into a shaky, and here in Europe always rainy and wet, hut for a week every year. The lesson's clear. The house, this edifice of stone and wood, is an illusion of safety, not safety itself. Just ask anyone whose house was in the path of a tornado or hurricane how actually permanent our illusory castles are. Physically, we have a better chance overall of survival with solid housing. Psychologically, however, we have a better chance of survival in addition to that when we recognize that everything that we think is permanent can disappear. On Sukkot, this practice of building and living in a sukkah, and more importantly, the contemplation of this while you're there, is very much like Shavasana is practiced in yoga. We're going to die someday, so let's symbolically practice this. Everything we think will last forever will not. Let's practice this so that we can survive and move on when it happens. In the Bronze Age nomadic period of Jewish development, we lived in non-permanent structures already and needed this deep truth in a different way. A sukkah would have been observed. We were there all the time. Eretz Israel was the perpetual battleground between whichever kingdom held sway to the south and which to the north, and the crossroads of their battles was a place called Megiddo. You might know this better as Armageddon. All things come from some place more interesting than our final ideologies. The settlement that took place later, leading to the Temple times, can only come at the collapse of the Bronze Age, when the northern and southern kingdoms licked their wounds long enough to allow for our more permanent settlement. At this point, our survival lesson could become Sukkot. We're building permanent houses, but we continue to remember the impermanence, to meditate on how easy it will be to lose this. And remember, the southern kingdom gained strength again, and the northern kingdom gained strength again, and we were caught right in the middle. I wonder how much our ability to stay Jewish was rooted in having a ritual truth this powerful. But before we had Sukkot, the lesson came through fire. The underlying spiritual lesson of this prohibition in Vayakhel seems to be fire is survival, but cannot save us from everything. Remember that lesson and you will survive when the fire's taken away. All of a sudden, the romanticized scene of the Jewish residents in Anatevka shrugging their shoulders and singing as they were forced to flee makes a lot more sense.
Maybe they have a plan.
We should defend ourselves.
An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth.
Very good. That way the whole world will be blind and toothless.
Rabbi, we've been waiting for the Messiah all our lives. Wouldn't this be a good time for him to come?
We'll have to wait for him someplace else.
There is a final interpretive place to go here, and that is the internal symbol of fire. Externally, fire protects and can be used as an ultimate tool for good or ill of changing the reality around us. Internal fire functions much in the same when on our soul. We burn with passion. We are on fire from the three-point line. We ignite our creativity. Our ideas blaze. Love is kindled. Our anger smolders. Shabbos is not just about the absence of work. Fire is specifically mentioned because it represents our psychological connection to that work. When we leave work, we haven't left work. Truly, if you are seeing this on or around Shabbos and have made it this far into the video, how many times have your thoughts drifted to something unresolved that happened at work? It's Shabbos. Why are we there? Because Vayakhel speaks of the Sabbath. The iterative question is a weekly one, not a yearly one. Just like Shabbos is a weekly holiday, not a yearly one. And it's hinted at by Ibn Ezra. We don't just step into Shabbos. We don't just sit there and it overwhelms us and comes over us. We prepare for it. What is burning in us right now, for good or for ill, that if we choose to take with us into Shabbat, will become the whole of Shabbat, not Shabbat, that thing that is unresolved. And we'll bring that to our table, and we'll bring that to our shuls, and it'll affect our relationships because we haven't unplugged. We are not present in the sacred space and time of the central mitzvah. We are captured by something that is giving off smoke that will obscure our desperate need to literally and figuratively unplug, with the price to pay for not doing so, survival itself. We can't survive in a perpetual state of fire. Speaking of which, the miracle of the burning bush, as taught by Rabbi Lawrence Kushner through the voice of Rashi, is not that the bush was burning and not consumed. It was that Moses paid attention long enough to notice this. Beautiful. The further exploration of this, in light of this mitzvah of not lighting fire, however, is the universal truth that only the eternal, not us, the sum of all that we are attached to, can burn constantly without being consumed. When we don't unplug, what's that phrase that we use? We burn out. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I mean that. A Shabbat of completeness, a Shabbat of presence, a Shabbat where we are here in this space and time because we really need it. We'll see you next time.
Wonder of wonders, miracle of miracles, God took a Daniel once again, stood by his side, and miracle of miracles walked him through the lion's den. Wonder of wonders, miracle of miracles, I was afraid that the God would frown, but like he did so long ago in Jericho, God just made the walls fall down. When Moses softened Pharaoh's heart, that was a miracle. When God made the waters of the Red Sea part, that was a miracle too. But of all God's miracles, large and small, the most miraculous one of all is that out of a worthless lump of clay, God a man today.